Well, speaking of putting out fires, in our annual reminder that shooting off aerial fireworks in Idaho is illegal, despite the fact you can buy them in Idaho, prompted the perennial pointing out how ridiculous the proximity of those 2 points together is, and how it's all totally fine as long as the person buying the illegal fireworks signs a piece of paper promising to not shoot them off in the state. But bringing up that point led Rick in Boise to text in, that affidavit that fireworks stands ask you to sign is a complete fiction. There's nothing in Idaho code that allows that. Okay, so you're saying my signature on this little piece of paper isn't worth the paper it's written on? According to the former state attorney general, that part is true. In 1997, Idaho added a fireworks act to its books, and it laid out what is allowed and what is not allowed when it comes to combustible celebrations. It covered topics like wholesalers, retailers, permits, when they can be sold and by whom. Aerial fireworks are described as special fireworks in this act, designed for display. And because they are more dangerous, well, they're covered by the U.S. Bureau of Explosives. They sound pretty important. Okay, so let's jump ahead 20 years. And dozens of wildfires that ended up being started by illegal fireworks in Idaho over that time span. In 2017, realizing this promise not to use them wasn't working very well, especially on the heels of a 2,500-acre fire near Boise's Table Rock, Boise Representative Matt Erpelding tried to get a bill passed to outlaw the sale of them altogether.
This comes down to a mistake in the original drafting and a loophole in the bill. So it was never intended that we do retail sales of aerial fireworks inside of Idaho.
However, that bill was never even introduced. The House State Affairs Committee voted 9-6 to not even allow it to be printed, much less get a public hearing. Those who voted against it said, well, because it wouldn't apply to Native American reservations. That's why they voted against it.
You would have one faction that would still be able to sell these, and no one else could. In my mind, I couldn't get past that. I just didn't feel like it was fair.
Are we going to continue this uneven playing field where the tribes are given exception because we have no jurisdiction over them, and we continue to regulate private parties to the disadvantage of private parties?
Because we couldn't regulate what happens on a reservation, we just said we're not doing it. So, okay. Representative Erpelding said he wasn't going to let it go either. Months later, he let it be known he asked then Attorney General Lawrence Wasden for an opinion on our fireworks regulations. And one of the questions he wanted answered, whether the whole signing of an affidavit was even legal, if it was even consistent with the language and intent of Idaho's Fireworks Act. Paul Panther, the chief of the Criminal Law Division, well, he answered that question with this opinion. He said the Fireworks Act neither requires nor prohibits a seller from getting an affidavit from a buyer where they promise not to sell or use them in the state. Sure, they can require it if they want to, but there's no law that says they have to. Panther went on to point out the Fireworks Act makes it very clear those special fireworks can only be sold to a person with a permit to use them in a public display or event, and only within a reasonable time period before that event. So many took that opinion to mean aerial fireworks are now illegal to buy in Idaho without a permit. However, it was just an opinion, and enforcement of it was left up to the individual counties, as laid out in the 1997 Act. And it was left up to interpretation. For example, in 2017, when that opinion came out, Elmore County Sheriff said they would enforce the new interpretation. Ada County Sheriff's Office, not so much, saying it was still unclear whether private citizens could buy aerial fireworks in Idaho. So here's what we do know. Those affidavits, as Rick pointed out, there's nothing in Idaho code allowing for that. But, as we also learned, they can still require them to absolve themselves from any obligation should any damages come from, I don't know, one of their bottle rockets sparking a 2,500-acre fire in the Boise foothills. However, if you do want to turn in your neighbors for illegal fireworks this holiday season, dispatch says, Ada County Dispatch says you can text them instead of calling them to help reduce the amount of calls they get on the 4th. You just got to report those issues that don't involve an active fire or medical emergency. Then you can text Ada County at the number that's at the bottom of the screen. Dispatch can then focus on those 911 emergency calls by themselves.